let's go ahead and walk through this. The goal for today is to take your written business process and convert it into Dubsado language, which will help you do two things. One, it will help you gather a comprehensive list of the content that needs to be built in the system. That's very important, is to gather the content that you're going to need to build in Dubsado first. And then two, it will help you build your workflows using Dubsado's framework. And when we get through everything today, you'll understand how what we're talking about today will help out with workflows. We're actually going to get you in a great position to build workflows by following these steps that we've laid out today. So a quick introduction and then we'll jump right into it. Your written out business process is your workflow. So a lot of people have questions about workflows. Some people think that workflows just means automation, but the term workflow is your actual business process. It's what you do as soon as a new lead comes in, all the way until you're finished working with that client. That's what your workflow is. So as we talk about workflows today, as we talk about business processes, what we're talking about is the very beginning of your process working with them, the initiation when they first come into Dubsado, all the way until the very end when you're finished working with them. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to take all of the different things that you do with a client from the very beginning until the end and put that into Dubsado. The emails you need to send, the forms, the tasks, everything that you need to do, you want to put that into the system. So the first thing we'll talk about before actually getting into writing out your process is to understand a couple things when it comes to a business process that will help break this down further. There are typically 3 phases, possibly more depending on services offered, but there are typically 3 phases in a business owner's workflow process. There's the inquiry phase, there's the booking phase, and then there's the booked phase when they're actually booked. Pretty much every single business has those 3 phases in their business. It doesn't matter the industry that you're in, any of that, pretty much every single business has that flow. You get a new lead, you pitch your pricing to them, you convert them into actual business, you receive money for your services, and then you finish up with them. So that is going to be the typical process for most businesses. There are some outliers where it's just immediately once they inquire, that means that they're booked. There are a couple of outliers in there, but typically that's going to be the flow. So in order to help you write out your process, and this particular part in the webinar is great for the people who are still in the process of writing out their process. So you might be brand new to business. You might have never written down your process before. This can help you get to the place where you have a written out process. So in order to help you write out your process, you should ask yourself the following 6 questions below, and we're going to go over those here, and answer them as detailed as possible. So you want to look at these 6 questions and actually write out the answers to these and be very specific with this, because it's going to help you frame your business process, which is your workflow. So the first question has to do with the inquiry phase, and that is, what is the very first thing that should happen when a new lead comes in? So when you ask yourself that question, what you should do first is write out what it is that happens the moment a new lead comes in, and write all of that out in detail. That is your inquiry phase. That's going to be maybe a consultation call. Maybe you send out a pricing guide. Maybe there's an intake questionnaire they need to fill out. Write out those answers there. The second phase is the booking phase. We talked about that. So the questions in the booking phase are, what are the next steps to get them booked or onboarded? So potentially in the booking phase, that's where you're sending out your proposal. Maybe you're sending out a quote to them. That's going to be the next steps to get them booked or onboarded, where you're actually doing the sale and actually pitching your pricing to the client. And then the other question you want to answer is, when do you consider the client to be booked? What is that milestone that they cross over that you would say as a business owner, okay, I consider this person booked now? Maybe that's a signed contract. Maybe that's them paying a deposit. Maybe that's them paying everything up front. Define actually what converts them into a booked job. And then that's going to be part of your booking phase. And then the last phase, the booked phase. So there's 3 questions in this one. Once the client is booked, what happens next? So after they have paid their deposit or signed their contract, whatever their milestone is that makes them a booked job, what happens after that? Do you send out an onboarding questionnaire? Maybe you send out the client portal information to them. What happens right after that? Maybe it's a welcome packet. So write out that in detail of what happens once they book with you. Then you need to define when the work with the client concludes. What is that marker that you would say, okay, I'm done working with them? Maybe if you are an event planner, it's when that event is over. Or if you're in the wedding industry, it's when the wedding is over. If you're a photographer, it's when the shoot is over. If you're in the design field, maybe it's when you deliver the designs to them. So define when the work concludes with the client. And then the last question is, do you send any follow-ups to the client after the project has ended? So now what you're going to do is think to yourself, if I'm in the wedding industry and I get done with the wedding, but I also want to send out an anniversary email a year later. So what follow-ups do you send out? Maybe once you're done working with them, you send out another proposal to try to upsell them on another service. Maybe you send out a review email, or maybe you have a survey that you want them to fill out. So all of those different things, you need to define what you send out once you're done with the service that you've provided. If you fill out those 6 questions and fill them out as detailed as you possibly can, include to-dos, include emails, forms, contracts, scheduler templates, everything that you need to send out in that entire process, write that out in detail, and that's what your business process is. That is your workflow, and that's what you're going to build in Dubsado. The reason this works out really well for you is because Dubsado has so many different features and settings and possibilities and all of these different ingredients that you can put together. You need to develop what you're planning on building in Dubsado. So by answering these 6 questions, you have a game plan going into Dubsado of what it is that you are actually building. You have a step-by-step on what you're building. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk through these 4 things here, just some tips for you guys when you're writing out these answers to these questions. So when you're answering these, number 1, make sure you include 3 things when you're writing out the answers to these 6 questions. Write what you are doing, when you want it to happen, and which piece of content is going out with it. So for example, if I'm sending out my discovery call scheduler, I would write, I want to email my discovery call scheduler immediately after I approve the lead. Maybe that's what it is. Or send out the client portal information after they pay a 50% deposit. What I'm doing is I'm defining what it is that I want to do, when that's going to happen, which is the crucial piece. Because when you build a workflow, you're programming the timing in there. So you always want to include when, and then you also want to include somewhere in that action that you're writing out what content is going out. I want to send my discovery call scheduler, or I need to send out my proposal or my contract. Make sure you're including any content that you need to go out in there, okay? And then the next thing is, whenever you're sending out a form or a scheduler template, any content, you should always start with the phrasing, email the blank, email the consultation call scheduler, email the proposal, contract, and invoice, email the pre-session questionnaire. You always want to write it in that phrase because it's going to help you in the long run to identify the content, and that will make more sense once we actually see a process here. You'll see why you want to write it out in that way. The other thing to take into consideration, if you have never built a workflow before, a lot of people think that workflows are you just push a button and it just runs. And so a lot of people are hesitant to build workflows because they might say, well, I don't really want everything to be automated. I want to have control over everything. in the workflow, you can put approve buttons and you can create tasks inside the workflow. So it doesn't have to be 100% automated. So what you should do is any action that you're writing out when you're answering these questions, you should just mark next to it that you want to approve that to go out, that needs to be customized, that you want to approve that action to go out, because you can build approve buttons into actions in the workflow. So while you're writing out these answers, make sure you indicate somewhere, I want to approve this before it goes out, because you can absolutely do that. So that's another tip for you. And then the other thing is, if you have a workflow where there's a fork in the road. So there are a lot of businesses where you might say, well, if they answer yes to this, then I want it to do this. Or if they say no to this, I want it to go down this route. And then they get really overwhelmed with things. So what I usually recommend doing first is write out your process as if they're going to say yes first. The reason why is because if at the very beginning, if they say yes, I want them to go down this road, that's usually the road to the end of the service. So what that does for you is it does two things. One, it gets you through your entire process. So write out your process first as if they're going to say yes. That will get you through your entire process. The second thing is that it gets you in the right confident mindset for your clients to want to work with you. So if you're thinking, okay, once I do this, they're going to say yes to that, and then this happens, it gets you in that mindset to actually write out your process as if they're going to say yes, and that gets you in a confident mindset, which is always great. And then you can worry about maybe a no workflow at another time. Always start off with the affirmative that they're going to say yes, and that way it gets you through your entire process. So just a couple of tips for you while you're answering those questions. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward and act like I've written everything out, and I'm going to show you what that would look like. So now I have this here. And this is something that I just did in this program that I use for the outlines. It's called Notion. You could download Notion. This is very much like an Excel spreadsheet, which basically everyone has access to. So if you want to do an Excel spreadsheet or sticky notes or any of those mind map platforms that you can download online, whatever you need to do to get this out in front of you so you can see it, do that. It could just be a scratch piece of paper. That's okay too. Whatever you need to do to get it out in front of you is what's most important. So let's walk through this process here. We're going to talk through this so you guys can see where this is actually getting put onto paper here. Well, paper, but you understand what I'm saying. So in this is what we call round one. So this is the very first outline of your process. So when we go through this, you're going to see three things. One, I am including what I want to do. Two, I'm including when. I'm very specific about it. And then three, I'm also including in the action what content I'm sending out. So you'll see that in all three of these things. The other two things you'll notice is on the left-hand side here, I also just put on the side what phase I'm in. You don't have to do it this way, but if it helps kind of break down those three phases easier for you, I just indicated to the left here what phase I'm in. So that way I can easily identify the different phases of my actual process. The other thing you'll notice is over here on the right-hand side, that's where I've indicated, okay, I need to approve that, I need to approve this, and I need to approve that. So that's all that I have on this first round here, and now we'll talk through it. So the first thing that I do is I email the consultation call scheduler after I approve the new lead. So I'm writing this out just in plain English. It's not in Dubsado language yet. I'm writing this out as if this is just my process. So we're not in the language. We're going to get to that a little bit later, but right now, just write it out how you normally would. So in my inquiry phase, which is what is the very first thing that should happen when a new lead comes in? So I get a new lead. The first thing I want to do is email the consultation call scheduler after I approve the new lead. So of course, I put an approve button on there. Then I want to email a pre-session questionnaire out to them 24 hours before the call happens. before I do that discovery consultation call. So this is my process. If you have a different process, that's totally fine. Every business is different, but in this particular business, this is just an example. So then I would email out a questionnaire to them 24 hours before the consultation. Maybe I need them to fill something out before I get on the phone with them. So I send that out. Then once that's done and I have the consultation call, now it's time to move into my booking process. So everything went well on the consultation. And now I want to move in, okay, we talked about it. I know what you're interested in. Now let's actually get you booked. So this is the booking phase we're moving into. So now the next thing I need to do is I want to prep the proposal for the client. I want to get everything together. We talked on the phone. I know what they're interested in. Now I want to prep a quote for them or a proposal, kind of the same thing there. And I want to do that after the consultation call is over, okay? Then once I get that proposal done, I want to email my proposal, my contract, and my invoice out to the client after it's prepped and ready to go. So this here, I also want to put an approve button on there because I just want to make sure everything's good with the proposal before I send it. Or I might need to edit some language in the contract, something like that. So I put an approve button on there because I just want to make sure that that's ready to go. So one other side note here, if you're not familiar with Dubsado, you are able to send out a proposal, contract, and invoice together. If you want to learn how to do that, in our YouTube channel, my colleague Sam just made a webinar about that. She did that on Tuesday this week, and that's already up on our YouTube channel. So feel free to go watch that if you want to learn a little bit more about combining a proposal, contract, and invoice together. You don't have to do that, but if you want to, it's possible to connect all those together. So I send out the proposal to them, and then I want to email a follow-up to them if they don't fill out that proposal after 3 days. Now, as you can see here, I'm being very specific about when I'm sending out that follow-up. If you're doing that, don't say, I just want to email a follow-up to a client and leave it as that. Be very specific about when you want to send that out. The next thing is I want to email another follow-up to them if they don't fill out the proposal after 7 days. So again, I give them 3 days, they don't fill it out. In 7 days, I want them to receive something else. Then my lead becomes a booked job after they make their 50% deposit. So in this case, I have it where once they pay half up front, that makes them a booked job. So if you remember in our questions, one of the questions is, when do you consider the client to be booked? That's where I'm answering that question, is the lead becomes a booked job. I'm very specific, and I put in the milestone on when they become a booked job. So that's the answer to question 3. Now we're moving into question 4. Once the client is booked, what happens next? So you can see here in my booked workflow, this is what happens after they get booked. So I want to activate their client portal after they become a booked job. I was just very specific on when I want to activate their client portal. It's once they become a booked job. Then I want to create a portal password for the client. So I need to set up a password for them. And that's after the portal gets activated. I need to set up a password. Then I want to email out the client portal information to them after I set the password for the client. So again, even though this might be just kind of, oh yeah, well, once I set the password, you need to define that in there, and it's going to help you a lot when we get into the next portion. Then I want to send out a checking in email 8 weeks before their event. So I have a checking in email that I want to send out to them 8 weeks before, 2 months out. Hey, how's everything going? Just want to make sure that you're good. Then I want to email a pre-event meeting scheduler. So in this particular business, I might have a pre-event meeting scheduler. So before we actually have our event, I want to get on the phone with them, and I'm going to send that out 2 weeks before their event. Then once they pay their invoice in full, I want to send out a receipt email to the client. So I made it very specific. Once they pay their invoice and it's all paid up, I want to send out a receipt email to them. Then I have a little task here, get everything packed up and ready to go 3 days before their event. So this is more of a task that I need to get done. And then I want to send out a congratulations slash 3 days after their event is over. Now, if everything doesn't go well, maybe I want to add an approve button on there just in case, or maybe I want to add something specific about the event so that it doesn't seem too generic. I can add in some custom details there. So I want to put an approve button on there because before that goes out, I want to customize it a little bit. And then the last thing is I want to send an actual physical thank you card in the mail to them 1 week after their event is over. So this is just a process that I put together. This is probably not everybody's process, but this is just a way that you can kind of see how I broke down each one of those questions. And you'll see here that I identified when the work with the client concludes, it's after the event is over. And do I send any follow-ups to the client, which I clearly do here. I send out a congratulations email after the event is over. So I've defined all of my 6 questions, and it's all written out here in a format that includes what I'm doing, when it's happening, and what content is going out. So that's how it should look when you write out your process. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this exact same process, and what we're going to do is define what needs to be built in Dubsado now. So let's say I'm brand new to Dubsado. I haven't put anything in the system yet. I've just defined my process. Now I need to figure out what needs to go in Dubsado. So that's the next section that we're going to talk about here. So what I usually recommend doing, you don't have to follow this exact same example. You can do whatever method works best for you, but this really helps me out anytime I'm trying to break down a workflow and figure out what content I need in the system. So color coding your content will make it easier to come up with a comprehensive list of what you need to build in Dubsado before building your workflows. So what I did was I just created a little legend here. And again, you don't have to use the exact same colors and all of that. You can spice it up and make it your own. But what I did was give myself a very clear legend on if it's a form, it's going to be in blue. If it's orange, that's going to be a scheduler template. Red will be a canned email. Green will be a task. And pink will be a payment schedule. So that way, visually, I can look at my process here and say, okay, now I have an idea of everything that I need in the system. So one thing that I want to point out here is this is the exact same process, just with some color added in there. Now, if you remember up top, I gave you guys kind of a tip when you're writing out your process that anytime you're sending out a form or a contract, any attachment, a scheduler, you always want to use the phrase email the blank. The reason why you want to do that is because a lot of people might say, oh, I want to send out my appointment scheduler to the client, but they don't think about the fact that they also need a canned email to send out that scheduler. Or I want to send out my proposal to the client at this point in time, and they build their proposal, they get it all ready to go, but they forget to write the email that they need, a canned email, to go with that proposal when they send it out. So that's why using the phrase email the consultation call scheduler helps, because now you can highlight that word email and put it red for a canned email. So that also will be a good reminder for me to say, oh, I also need to write an email to go with that scheduler. So when you're writing it out, that's why it's important to write it out in that phrasing so you can highlight it better. And that way you don't forget any canned emails, because honestly, when you're working in Dubsado, that's something that really gets forgotten about, is writing the canned emails and getting all of those together. So use that phrasing anytime that you're planning on emailing something to a client. Always use that phrasing, and it will help you identify that you need a canned email at that point. So if I'm looking at this process now I can look at this and say, okay, what do I need to put in Dubsado? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 emails that I need to write. I have 1, 2 schedulers that I need to build. And I have three forms that I need to build in here as well: a pre-session questionnaire, a proposal, and a contract. So that comprehensive list now, I'm building things just to build them because I, saw somebody else use this. And so I'm just going to build it because I thought it was cool. Now I have this in here and I have a game plan coming into Dubsado on, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to set up my 10 canned emails, I'm going to set up my 2 schedulers, I have 3 forms that I need to build. And then over here, because remember, after they make their 50% deposit, that's when I want them to become a booked job. So that also means that I have a payment schedule that I need to build as well. So I put that in pink so I don't forget that I have a payment schedule I need to build. So I'm going into Dubsado, not just building things just to build them or just kind of poking around. Now I actually have a game plan. I know what I'm creating workflow-wise and what content I need to build when I get into the system. So that's round 2, is identifying the content. You don't have to use color coding. If there's another method that you think would work better for you, you can do that. But the main point here is to just get it where you can see what content you need to put into Dubsado, okay? All right, and then one pro tip for you, because this is something that if you aren't familiar with it, you might not know that you can do this. So I wanted to add this into this outline. Scheduler templates have 3 emails that can be included within the template: an invitation email, a confirmation email, and appointment reminders. So if I see a scheduler template here, I need to write an email to invite them to book a call. So that would be this email, the consultation call scheduler, my invite email. And then there would be 2 other emails that I can include with the scheduler: a confirmation email and an appointment reminder. So when you're going through and figuring out what content you need, just remember anytime that you have a scheduler, there's 3 emails that go with that scheduler technically. So just a little pro tip for you so you don't forget about any content that could also go in the system. And now the last thing that we're going to talk about is, now that I have my process together, how can I translate this into Dubsado language? Because I can't go into the workflow section. Let's say I have my process written out, I have my content built. I can't go in here and find all of these different triggers in Dubsado. I can't go in and find all of these different actions in Dubsado either. There's a certain language that Dubsado uses. So I want to show you how to take what you have here and break it down in a way that it makes sense in Dubsado, so that when you get to workflows, you know exactly how you're going to build it, okay? So we're going to bounce back and forth here. And well, actually, the way I have it set up, we won't have to bounce back and forth. But what I wanted to do for this outline, so for those of you who are downloading this outline, I put the different actions and triggers here for you. So that way you don't have to be in Dubsado and necessarily go into a workflow and look at all the actions and triggers. This is more of a cheat sheet for you so you can see the different actions and triggers right here and have that pulled up. That way you can use this almost as a glossary and you can say, okay, this action fits the best with this, or this trigger will work the best here. So I just put screenshots in there for you so you can see all of the actions and triggers that we have available. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the next level, and I'm going to basically take what we have and then translate it. Now, when you go into workflows and you're building actions and triggers, this list, the list here and the list here, can be very overwhelming. You might look at this and say, which one do I choose? Because there are 30 different things and I have no idea which one's going to work the best. This is why having everything written out will help you, because all you're going to do is look at your written out process and just take it step by step. And I'll show you how to do that here. So now we have this process. And the first thing, remember, is we want to email the consultation call questionnaire or the consultation call scheduler right after we approve the lead. Now, one thing that is a really great tip, and I'm actually going to mention it now so that it makes sense why I'm doing what I'm doing, is this tip down here that is always try to find the most specific trigger available that's possible to use. If nothing else is available, if we don't have the very specific trigger that you're looking for, then it's going to be after all previous actions are complete, and might put an approve button on there. And that'll make sense as we go through here. You'll see why I say that. So with this here, one of the triggers that we have is after the workflow starts. So again, since this is the first action in the workflow, that's what I would use here. As soon as the workflow begins, I want to send this out, but remember, I want to approve it. So yes, it's going to go out in the very beginning of the workflow, but because I have that approve button on there, that's what's going to keep it at bay until I approve it to go out. But what I have here is email the consultation call scheduler. So I'm going to look at this actions list and say, okay, if I want to email the consultation call scheduler out to the client, which one would work best? Well, the one that we have that fits closest to what we're trying to do is send appointment scheduler. We actually want to send that out to the client. And if you're familiar with Dubsado, if you've ever sent anything out manually, maybe you have gotten into workflows, you know that you'll always pick the content you want to send first, and then you can choose the email that goes out with it. So if I'm sending out an appointment scheduler to the client, that would be the action that I choose immediately after the workflow starts, and then I can put an approve button on there. Next, I want to email the pre-session questionnaire out to them. So I want to send them a form. So the action that would fit best is send form. And that's the action that I would plug in there. And if you remember from above, I want to do that 24 hours before their appointment starts. So if I'm doing a combination here, I would say 24 hours before an appointment start time. So I would look through here and I would say which which trigger would fit best with that time frame, okay? Then booking phase, remember green are tasks. So if this is a task that I need to create and I'm looking at this list, which one would closely associate with me needing to build a task? Create to do. So I would create a to do for my next option here. And I want to create that. And I want to be specific. I want to create that task to prepare my proposal once I'm done with the appointment. That was the trigger that I used up here after the consultation call is over. So now down at the bottom, after an appointment has ended would be the best trigger for that. So again, be as specific as possible. That's why when you're writing out your process, you don't just want to say, next, I want to send this out, because then when you get to this trigger portion, it's harder to really identify which one is specific. So if you write, as soon as their appointment is over, then you will know from this list which one fits the best after an appointment has ended. So that's why it's important to write it out as vividly as possible, okay? So then email the proposal, contract, and invoice. Now I'm sending out a proposal to them and it's going to connect the contract and invoice. So I want to send a form to them because I'm actually sending a form. And that is after all previous actions are complete. Now, remember the tip that I said below, that if we don't have a trigger that matches what the actual trigger is, you're going to use after all previous actions are complete. And this is why. So the trigger that would work best for this is I want to email the proposal, contract, and invoice after it's prepped and ready to go. In this list, we don't have anything that says after it's prepped and ready to go. There's nothing that resembles that in here. So because we don't have something that's specific, I'm going to choose after all previous actions are complete. That's kind of the, if nothing else works, use that one. If there's nothing else that clearly identifies when you want that to happen, use that trigger. That's really what that's for. So I don't want this to be automatic. So remember, I have my approve button on there. So this technically means that once I mark the proposal completed, that I got that prepped, it would send out. But I want to put that approve button on there just in case, okay? Next, email a follow-up. So very specific and straightforward. I just want to send out an email to the client, so I can choose send email. One of the tips that I have below is anytime you're using send email, that should be where you're just sending out a plain email to the client. You're not sending out forms or schedulers or anything like that. It's just a plain email. So I have send email 3 days after the form is not completed. And that's the one that fits best here, because again, we're watching to see if that proposal gets completed. I'm very specific in here about when I want that to happen. That's why, again, that it's important to identify clearly when something is going to happen. Again, send a follow-up 7 days after the form is not completed, okay? Now let's move into the booked phase. So I want to activate the client portal. In this action list, we have an action that says activate the client portal. So that would work best in this kind of matching game here. And then when do I want to do that? I want them to get their portal activated when they pay their 50% deposit. So in this list here, after invoice paid in full would not work here, because that means it's after everything is paid. I want to do something after a scheduled payment is completed. So I would choose that option, because I would add my payment schedule to the workflow. So that would be the best trigger there, okay? Next, create a portal password. That's a to-do for me. So I would do create to-do. And if you remember, what I have for the password is after the portal is activated. If you look at this trigger list, we don't have anything in here that says after portal gets activated. So that means I already know now that I'm going to use after all previous actions are complete, because I don't have anything else in there that I can use for create a client portal password after the client portal gets activated. We don't have that trigger in here. So you're going to use after all previous actions are complete. Then I want to email the client portal information. So I'm just sending out a plain email to them, no forms or schedulers. So just plain send email. And then the trigger that we used here, remember, was after setting up the password for the client. We don't have that trigger. After all previous actions are complete is going to be what we would use for that then, okay? Maybe you throw an approve button on there, maybe not, but you could experiment with that. Then we're going to start using some project triggers. So if you remember, I want to send out a checking in email to them 8 weeks before their event. So if I'm looking at this list, oh, we have project date triggers that we can use. So this is their event date. So I want to send out something 8 weeks before their project starts. So that would be the trigger that I would use there. Then I want to email, again, an email would need to be created, my pre-event meeting scheduler. So because I'm sending out an appointment scheduler, that would be the actual action that I'm going to use. Not send email, because I'm actually sending out an appointment scheduler. I want to use that as the action, okay? 2 weeks, again, before their event, so before project start date. Then I want to send out a receipt email immediately after the invoice is paid in full. So I want to send out that receipt, but with this trigger, I only want that receipt to go out when they pay everything. So I would do after invoice paid in full as my receipt trigger. And then I have another task, get everything packed up and ready to go. So that would be a to-do that I would create. And I want that to populate 3 days before their event starts. So that's totally fine. I put that in there before project start date. Then I want to send out my congratulations email to them. And it's just an email I'm sending out, a congratulations. And then, hey, here's a link to Yelp if you want to go leave me a review. I'm not sending out any forms or schedulers or anything like that. If it was a questionnaire or a survey that I'm sending out that I built in Dubsado, then it would be send form, because there's an actual form in here. But this is just a plain email. So that means it's going to be send email. And then 3 days after their project is over, so after the end date, once that project is over and I want to approve that. And then the last thing is a to-do to send a thank you card in the mail 1 week after the project is over. So what I did was I literally took my process, I looked at the actions and triggers that are available, and I went through the list and I said, okay, if this is the action that I'm doing, which one of these fits best with what I'm trying to do? And you should do that with actions and with triggers. If it's not available in this list, it will be after all previous actions are complete. That's a great rule of thumb to know when you're writing out your process and trying to translate it into Dubsado. Find something that is a lot more specific, always use that. You can get into a lot of trouble if you just throw after all previous actions are complete on everything, because then it's going to fire off one after another. What makes the workflow so cool is that you can take these triggers and be very detailed and specific on, I only want this to happen once this happens. And that's what makes it where it has that automation and also the control over the workflow. So last thing here, just a couple guidelines and tips for you. When you are sending a form, so that means a questionnaire, a contract, a sub-agreement, and I also didn't write in here a proposal, it shouldn't be a contract. That should actually be proposal. So if you are looking at this and watching this, contract should actually be proposal. That's a typo that I put in there. When you are sending out one of those three forms, you must always use send form, because that's what you're doing. You're sending out a form to the client. We have a send contract option. So if you're sending out a contract by itself, you would use that. But anytime it's a questionnaire, a proposal, or a sub-agreement, you will always use send form, because you're actually sending out a form to the client. That same logic applies to a scheduler. Anytime when you're sending out a scheduler, you have to use send appointment scheduler. It's the only way that it will work appropriately, because you're going to choose what scheduler you want to use in that action. And then we kind of already covered this, but for any emails that do not have any content, attachments, Dubsado templates, nothing in there, that's when you would use send email. If it's just a plain text email, there's nothing in there. Maybe you're hyperlinking to something on your website, but there's nothing Dubsado related in there. And then the last thing, after or always try to find the most specific trigger possible. If nothing is available, it will always be after all previous actions are complete. Maybe you put an approve button on there, maybe not. But that's up to you and your discretion if you want to throw that on there. So awesome. Well, that's all that I have for today. Hopefully this helps you guys out with understanding how to take a business process, break it down. You get a comprehensive list on what you need to build in Dubsado, so you have a game plan, and then you can translate that into workflow language just by using this simple cheat sheet right here. So obviously this is probably not your process, especially if you're, let's say, a designer or something like that, but you can use the same principles of going through, writing out, answering those questions first, the what, the when, and the which piece of content, write all that out, highlight your content, and then use this cheat sheet to kind of break down what that would actually mean from a Dubsado term. And that will help you with your workflows a lot, because this is what you're going to be building as a workflow.